Poor Omega Maid found the Alpha King's mute son crying, spoke through silent signs. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Emily Clark had always been the forgotten Omega. She worked diligently in the Grand Palace, unnoticed, a mere maid among countless others. Though she carried the mark of Omega, a subtle strength lived within her, one that wasn't seen by the world. The palace had never been a kind place for those like her. The Alpha Kings and their warriors ruled with unshakable authority, while the Omegas were left to serve in silence. But even in this cold, vast palace, there was warmth, small and fleeting, in the kindness of one person, her. That day, Emily had been assigned an unusual task, to care for the mysterious young boy who was always kept in the shadows. His presence was never spoken of, and when anyone did mention him, it was always in hushed tones, as if he were something to be hidden away. But Emily wasn't afraid. She had seen the boy only in fleeting moments, his pale face, his silvery eyes, his stillness, but never up close. She hadn't thought much of it until she found him crying in the corridor late that afternoon. There, in the dim light, the boy sat on the floor, his hands trembling as he wiped away tears. Emily's heart clenched at the sight. She rushed to him, her footsteps light but swift. "Hey, are you all right?" she asked gently, crouching down beside him. His eyes, wide with surprise, met hers, but he said nothing. His silence was thick, almost as if words were something foreign to him. Emily felt an instinctive pull to comfort him, to offer something more than just the usual cold treatment he likely received from others. She reached out slowly, unsure of how to communicate with him, but her empathy guided her. The boy's gaze softened as he looked at her, and then, with trembling fingers, he made a simple gesture, pointing to his throat and then to her. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she understood. He couldn't speak. His silence wasn't by choice. It was the only way he knew how to exist. His mute cries spoke louder than any words could. Emily nodded slowly, offering him a warm smile, her eyes full of compassion. "I can't speak like you, but I can listen," she whispered softly. In that moment, their silent connection deepened. Emily knew that this was no ordinary boy. He wasn't just some child hidden away in the palace. There was more to him than anyone could imagine, and she was the one to uncover it. But for now, all she could offer was her understanding, her empathy, and her willingness to be there for him. Little did Emily know, this encounter was only the beginning of a much deeper bond, a bond that would change their lives forever. As the days passed, Emily found herself drawn to Nathaniel more and more. She would visit him in secret, bringing him food, trying to communicate with him, and watching as he silently interacted with the world around him. Each time, their bond seemed to grow, though unsaid, felt deeply. Nathaniel would gesture with his hands, his face a mix of sadness and curiosity. It wasn't long before Emily became the only person who understood him, the only one who could read his silent signs. She had become his voice in a world that refused to hear him. One evening, as the moonlight filtered through the Grand Palace windows, Emily found herself sitting beside Nathaniel in the same dimly lit corner. He had been unusually quiet that day, his usual silent gestures replaced by long pauses, as though he were lost in thought. She sat beside him, her heart heavy with worry. "What's wrong, Nathaniel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze, his silver-gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that took her breath away. Slowly, he raised his hand and pointed to the thick curtains that covered the windows. Emily frowned, confused at first. Then she followed his gaze to the stars outside. With a soft sigh, he motioned again, this time using a series of slow, deliberate gestures. It took Emily a moment to understand, but when she did, her heart skipped a beat. "You want to go outside?" she asked, her voice full of hope and disbelief. He nodded, and for the first time, Emily saw a spark of something else in his eyes, something beyond sadness, beyond silence. There was a glimmer of excitement, a spark of longing for the world beyond the palace walls. Without a second thought, Emily stood up and extended her hand to him. "Let's go," she said, her voice filled with determination. Nathaniel hesitated for a brief moment, then placed his hand in hers. The contact was electric, the warmth of his touch sending a strange sensation through her. Together, they slipped through the quiet halls of the palace, careful to avoid detection. The night air was cool as they stepped into the courtyard, the moon casting a silvery glow over everything. Emily couldn't help but smile at the beauty of it all, and for a moment, the weight of their world seemed to lift. They walked in silence, side by side, as if nothing else mattered in the world. When they reached the edge of the garden, Nathaniel stopped and looked up at the sky. He pointed to the stars, then made a simple gesture that Emily had come to recognize. The sign for freedom. Emily's heart swelled with emotion. She had always known that Nathaniel was more than just a quiet, isolated boy. There was strength in him, strength that no one else could see. She had seen it from the very first moment they had met. As the hours passed, Emily and Nathaniel sat together, talking in their own way, through gestures, through the quiet connection that had grown between them. There, under the stars, Emily felt as though they were the only two people in the world. In that moment, everything else faded away, the palace, the pack, the rules that bound them. All that mattered was the silent bond they shared. As dawn began to break, Emily helped Nathaniel back to the palace. He was quieter now, but there was something different about him, a peace that had not been there before. As they returned to the palace, they shared one last look, a look that spoke volumes. They were no longer just a maid and a mute prince. They were something more. And for the first time, Emily felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between Emily and Nathaniel continued to grow. Emily spent more and more time with him, learning his silent signs and understanding his needs in ways no one else could. She found herself drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. Nathaniel, though unable to speak, began to express himself more clearly through his gestures. Every day, Emily discovered a new layer to his personality. He was intelligent, kind, and surprisingly strong for someone who had been hidden away for so long. One afternoon, as Emily was helping Nathaniel in the gardens, a soft breeze rustling the leaves around them, she noticed a change in him. He had been unusually quiet that day, his expression distant. Emily glanced at him with concern. "Nathaniel, what's wrong?" she asked gently, her voice filled with warmth and worry. He met her gaze, his silvery eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Slowly, he raised his hand and made a simple gesture, the sign for hurt. Emily's heart sank as she understood. He was in pain, but it wasn't physical. The emptiness in his eyes told her it was something deeper, something more than just a passing moment of sadness. Nathaniel pointed toward the palace, then to his own chest, his hand resting over his heart. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she realized what he was trying to say. "You miss your father, don't you?" she asked softly. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes downcast. The weight of the unspoken words hung heavy between them. Emily knew that Nathaniel's life had been one of isolation, his relationship with his father shrouded in secrecy. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of man Alpha King Cale Thornridge truly was, and why his son had been kept hidden away for so long. She reached out to Nathaniel, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know it's hard," she whispered, "but you're not alone anymore." Nathaniel turned to her, his gaze searching hers as if he were asking for reassurance. Emily smiled softly, offering him the comfort she could. "I'll be here for you always." In the weeks that followed, Emily and Nathaniel's bond deepened. She could sense when he was upset before he even made a sign. She could feel his quiet longing for something he couldn't quite express. Nathaniel would often look out toward the distant horizon, his gaze lost in thought, and Emily knew he was thinking about his father, the Alpha King, and the life he had been denied. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the palace gardens, Emily decided it was time for her to take a step forward. She knew that Nathaniel's connection with his father was something she could never fully understand, but she also knew that she had the power to be the one to offer him the support and comfort he so desperately needed. She would help him bridge the gap between his silent existence and the world outside. The next day, Emily took Nathaniel's hand in hers and led him to the royal chambers. Nathaniel hesitated at first, his eyes filled with uncertainty, but Emily squeezed his hand gently, assuring him that it would be all right. As they entered the grand room, Emily felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She was standing in the heart of the palace, the very place where Nathaniel had been hidden away for so long. Emily turned to Nathaniel, her voice soft but firm. "It's time to meet your father." Nathaniel's eyes widened, and for a moment, he seemed to withdraw, as if the thought of facing his father was too overwhelming. But Emily stood her ground, offering him the strength he needed. Slowly, Nathaniel nodded. Together, they walked toward the throne room, their steps in sync, their hearts beating with an unspoken understanding. When they reached the door, Emily turned to Nathaniel one last time. "You are not alone. You have me, and you have your father," she said softly. Nathaniel gave her a small, uncertain smile, his silent gratitude speaking volumes. As the doors of the throne room swung open, Emily felt the air shift. There, at the far end of the room, sat Alpha King Cale Thornridge. His cold gaze met hers, but it was Nathaniel who commanded the room. Emily could feel the tension in the air as father and son stood face to face for the first time in years. And in that moment, Emily knew their journey together was only just beginning. The throne room was filled with an eerie silence as Nathaniel and Emily stepped forward. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on Emily's chest. She could feel Nathaniel's hand trembling in hers, and she squeezed it reassuringly, offering him her quiet strength. The Alpha King, Cale Thornridge, sat on his throne, his cold eyes fixed on them. His regal presence commanded the room, but it was Nathaniel who seemed to hold the true power in this moment. Emily's heart raced, unsure of what would unfold next, but she was certain of one thing. Nathaniel was not the same silent boy she had met weeks ago. He had grown. She had grown with him. Together, they had forged a bond that no one could break. As they reached the center of the room, the tension between father and son was palpable. Nathaniel stood still, his gaze locked with Cale's, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty mixed with something more. Emily knew that this moment was not just about Nathaniel meeting his father. It was about the Alpha King facing the son he had hidden away, the son he had neglected for so long. The silence stretched on as Cale studied them both, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the scene. Nathaniel, the Alpha King's voice was deep, commanding, but there was a crack of emotion in it that Emily didn't expect. "It's been a long time." Nathaniel didn't respond verbally, but he stepped closer to his father, his movements slow but deliberate. Emily watched as Nathaniel reached out, his hands trembling slightly, but his resolve was clear. Cale, taken aback, hesitated for just a moment before he rose from his throne. Emily held her breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The Alpha King's gaze softened as he looked down at his son. There was no grand declaration, no loud proclamation. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement of years lost. Cale reached out, his large hand gently resting on Nathaniel's shoulder. The room seemed to hold its breath as father and son shared a moment of silent connection. Emily could see the change in Nathaniel's face, the tension in his shoulders melting away as his father accepted him. The years of isolation, the years of silence, began to fade in that single moment. It was not perfect, but it was real. "You've grown," Cale said softly, his voice now more of a whisper. Nathaniel's response was simple. He reached up and touched his father's hand, a gesture of trust, of finally breaking the wall that had separated them. Emily's heart swelled with emotion as she watched the two of them. She had been a part of something monumental, something that had changed the course of their lives. In the silence that followed, she realized how far they had all come. Nathaniel had found his voice, and in doing so, he had found his place in the world. The Alpha King had found his son again, and for the first time in years, the future seemed uncertain but filled with possibility. As they stood together in the heart of the palace, Emily knew that the journey ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, and the past could never truly be erased. But in that moment, there was hope. Hope for a new beginning, a future where father and son could rebuild what had been lost. As they turned to leave the throne room, Nathaniel's hand once again found Emily's, and she felt a sense of peace settle over her. They had both found their place, and together, they would face whatever came next. The bond between them, forged in silence and understanding, would carry them forward into the uncertain future. The days following the reunion between Nathaniel and his father, Alpha King Cale Thornridge, brought new challenges and revelations. Emily found herself in a new position, one she never thought she would occupy, standing at the side of Nathaniel as his confidant and protector. The bond between them had deepened in ways she hadn't expected, and though she had always seen Nathaniel's strength, she was now witnessing it firsthand. Nathaniel no longer hid in the shadows. With his father's recognition, he began to take small steps toward embracing his place in the world. Emily often found herself watching him from afar, marveling at his growth. He wasn't just the mute boy she had first encountered in the corridors of the palace. He was a young man discovering his own power, his own voice, even without the ability to speak. Yet, with all his progress, the tension between father and son remained. Alpha King Cale, despite his quiet affection for Nathaniel, still struggled with the deep-seated guilt of having kept his son hidden for so many years. He was the ruler of the Northern Territories, a king who had always carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, but now, he had to learn how to be a father. It wasn't easy. Emily could see it in the way Cale would watch Nathaniel from the corner of his eye, always carefully measured, never fully open. Nathaniel, on the other hand, had no such hesitation. He had already forgiven his father, or perhaps, he had never held the grudge. But the journey ahead was still uncertain. One evening, as Emily sat in the garden with Nathaniel, the quiet hum of the evening air filling the space between them, she couldn't help but wonder about the future. "Do you think he'll ever be able to forgive himself?" she asked softly, her eyes following the flickering shadows in the garden. Nathaniel looked up at her, his silvery eyes reflecting the fading light of the setting sun. He didn't need to speak. His hand found hers, a gentle reassurance that spoke louder than words. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand in return. "I think he's already started," she whispered. As the weeks passed, the palace began to change. The tension that had once gripped its halls slowly eased. Nathaniel and his father spent more time together, and though their interactions were still delicate, there was a growing sense of understanding. One day, as Emily entered the throne room, she found them sitting together at the far end of the room, in deep conversation. Cale looked up as she entered, a rare softness in his gaze. "Emily, come," he called, gesturing for her to join them. She stepped forward hesitantly, unsure of what to expect, but a part of her had long known that the dynamic between them was shifting. As she approached, Cale smiled, a genuine expression that warmed the coldness of his usual demeanor. "Nathaniel and I were just talking about the future, about how we can begin to rebuild what's been lost." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with hope. "That sounds like a good place to start," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. Nathaniel gave her a smile, one that was not just a flicker of emotion, but a real, heartfelt gesture. It was the first time she had seen him smile like that, and it made her heart swell with pride. The past was not something they could undo, but together, they could create something new. As the days passed, Emily knew that the road ahead would be long. The palace was still full of whispers, still uncertain of the changes that were taking place. But for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like there was a chance for something better. A chance for Nathaniel to find his place not just as the son of the Alpha King, but as a person in his own right, with the freedom to be who he truly was. She would be there with him every step of the way, ready to face whatever came next. And with that, Emily realized that she had found something unexpected, hope, not just for Nathaniel, but for herself as well. She was no longer just an Omega Maid. She was a part of something greater, something that was still unfolding. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. As the days went on, Emily began to notice subtle changes within the palace. The air was less tense, the atmosphere lighter. The relationship between Nathaniel and his father, Cale, although still fragile, had evolved in a way that Emily hadn't expected. The Alpha King, who had once seemed distant and cold, was now slowly opening up to his son. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Emily had been a quiet observer, standing on the sidelines, witnessing their small steps toward reconciliation. She often caught moments between them when neither said anything, but the weight of their shared silence spoke volumes. One afternoon, Emily found herself in the royal gardens with Nathaniel, who seemed more at ease than ever before. They were sitting under the shade of a large tree, the the sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting soft patterns on the ground. Nathaniel, for once, was not preoccupied with his thoughts. He had a smile on his face, the kind that made his entire presence seem brighter. Emily smiled back, her heart light with the simple joy of seeing him so content. "Nathaniel, you seem different," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. He looked at her, his silver eyes sparkling with a quiet joy, and he nodded. There was no need for words. She could see the change in him. It was in the way he held himself, in the way his gaze was steadier, more sure. "I think I'm finally starting to understand who I am," he sighed, his fingers moving fluidly in front of him. Emily's heart swelled. She had watched him grow, not just in strength, but in confidence. There was something so beautiful in the way he was learning to accept himself. "And who are you, Nathaniel?" Emily asked, her voice gentle. Nathaniel paused, his fingers hovering in the air for a moment before he made his sign, the one that had come to mean so much to her. He pointed to himself and then to her, signing you. It was simple, but it held a depth of meaning that made her breath catch in her throat. He saw her. He saw her as more than just the maid who helped him, more than just the one who had been there when no one else was. In that moment, Emily realized just how far they had come together. She wasn't just helping him anymore. They were partners, both on a journey of self-discovery, both finding their place in the world. Later that evening, Emily stood at the edge of the courtyard, looking out at the stars. She couldn't help but wonder about the future. The future for Nathaniel, for Cale, and for herself. The palace was still full of whispers, but Emily felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. She had always felt like an outsider, but now, she was beginning to see her role here, not just as an observer, but as someone who truly belonged. As she walked back to her chambers, she saw Nathaniel standing in the hallway, his silhouette outlined by the moonlight. He turned when he heard her approach, and for a moment, they simply stood there, looking at each other. Without saying a word, Nathaniel held out his hand to her. Emily's heart fluttered as she took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch, the silent understanding between them. Together, they walked through the palace, no longer just two lost souls wandering through the halls. They were something more now, something stronger, something united. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt ready to face it. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days grew longer as the bond between Nathaniel and Emily continued to strengthen. Their quiet moments together became the foundation of something deeper, something that neither of them had expected. Emily watched as Nathaniel's confidence grew with each passing day. He no longer lingered in the shadows. Instead, he walked with a quiet assurance, his steps echoing in the halls of the palace. It was as if he had found his place in a world that had once seemed so foreign to him. The tension between him and his father, Cale, began to shift as well. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confrontations, but small changes that Emily noticed. Cale would look at Nathaniel differently now, as if seeing him not just as a son, but as a person worthy of his attention. The Alpha King, once so distant and cold, was beginning to open up to his son in subtle ways. Emily, though still unsure of her place, found herself grateful for these changes. It had been a long road for both Nathaniel and Cale, but there was something comforting about the slow, steady progress they were making. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily found herself in the royal library, a place she often sought refuge when she needed a moment of peace. She had been reading a book, her mind wandering through the pages, when she heard a soft knock at the door. Looking up, she saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a hint of uncertainty. "Nathaniel," Emily called softly, closing the book in her lap. "What's wrong?" Nathaniel stepped inside, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes locked onto hers with a quiet intensity. He signed, his fingers moving fluidly in front of him, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. "I need to talk to you," he signed. Emily stood up, moving toward him. "Of course," she said gently. "What's on your mind?" Nathaniel hesitated for a moment before he gestured toward the window, where the moonlight bathed the room in a soft glow. He then made a sign she had never seen before. It was a symbol of longing, a gesture that spoke of something deeper, something hidden. Emily frowned slightly, unsure of what it meant. Nathaniel's fingers moved again, and this time, he pointed to himself and then to her. You want to talk about us? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Emily's heart raced. She had always known that there was something more between them, something unspoken. But to have Nathaniel express it now, in such a quiet, meaningful way, was both overwhelming and beautiful. She took a step closer to him, her hand reaching out to touch his. Nathaniel's eyes softened as their hands met, and Emily could feel the warmth of his touch, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. I've never been good at this, Nathaniel sighed, his eyes downcast. But I know you're the one who understands me. Emily's heart fluttered in her chest. She had always seen Nathaniel as more than just the silent boy trapped in his own world. She had seen his strength, his courage, and now, she saw his vulnerability. He was opening up to her in a way that no one else could see, and that made everything feel more real. I understand you, she whispered, more than anyone else ever could. Nathaniel smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, and in that moment, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but with Nathaniel by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Emily felt like she had found her place. Together, she and Nathaniel would navigate the unknown, not as maid and prince, but as partners, as equals. And with that, Emily knew that the world had opened up before them, a world full of possibilities, a world they would face hand in hand. Weeks passed since Nathaniel and Emily had their quiet moment in the library, and the bond between them only continued to grow. Nathaniel was no longer the quiet, unsure boy he had been when they first met. He had blossomed, his confidence shining through with every gesture, every smile he shared with Emily. The walls that once separated him from the world seemed to be slowly crumbling, and the connection he had with his father, Alpha King Kale, though still fragile, was strengthening. Yet, there was still a tension that lingered in the air, a tension that came from the past that neither Nathaniel nor Kale could fully escape. But Emily could see the subtle changes, the small shifts in the way they interacted. The silence between father and son was no longer awkward. It was comfortable, an understanding that neither had expected but both were learning to embrace. One evening, as Emily sat by the window, watching the sun set over the distant hills, Nathaniel entered the room. Quietly, his presence as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She turned to him and smiled softly. "You're late tonight," she remarked, though her voice held no reproach, only warmth. Nathaniel gave her a small smile in return, though it didn't reach his eyes. He crossed the room and sat beside her, his fingers lightly grazing hers. "I was with my father," he signed, his hand moving fluidly in the air. Emily's heart swelled. It wasn't often that Nathaniel spoke about his time with Kale. She knew it was still difficult for him, the relationship between them still a work in progress. "How was it?" she asked gently, her voice soft with curiosity. Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching hers as if deciding how much to share. Finally, he signed, "Better. We're learning to communicate, even if it's slow." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had always known Nathaniel had a strength that no one else saw, and to hear that he and Kale were finally finding their way toward one another was something she had hoped for, but hadn't dared to believe would happen so soon. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, her hand squeezing his gently. Nathaniel looked at her, his silver eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. "Thank you," he signed, his fingers lingering on hers. Emily didn't need to hear the words. She could feel the sincerity behind them. In that moment, she realized that their journey together had only just begun. There was so much more for them to discover, so many more challenges to face, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt hope. The future was no longer a distant, uncertain thing. It was right here, in front of them, waiting to be shaped. The world outside the palace had always seemed so vast, so full of possibilities. But now, with Nathaniel by her side, Emily realized that it didn't matter how big the world was. As long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. The bond they shared, quiet and unspoken as it was, would be enough to carry them through the darkest of times. And with that thought, Emily allowed herself to relax for the first time in weeks. She was no longer just a maid, no longer just an outsider in a palace full of power and wealth. She had found her place, not just as Nathaniel's protector, but as his equal, his partner. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future held, and nothing would be able to break the bond they had formed. The days turned into weeks, and the bond between Emily and Nathaniel grew stronger than ever before. They had become inseparable, two souls intertwined by a quiet understanding and a shared journey of healing. The palace, once an intimidating place where Emily had felt like an outsider, now felt like home. As Nathaniel's confidence grew, so did his relationship with his father, Alpha King Kale. There were still moments of tension, but they were fewer and farther between. Emily could see that Kale was trying, really trying, to rebuild what had been lost between him and his son. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. One afternoon, as Emily walked through the grand hallways of the palace, she heard laughter. It was Nathaniel's laughter, a sound she hadn't heard in so long. She smiled to herself and followed the sound until she found him in the courtyard, standing with Kale. The two of them were sitting on the stone steps, their heads bent together as they whispered and laughed about something Emily couldn't hear. It was a rare sight to see the Alpha King so relaxed, so at ease with his son. Emily's heart warmed at the sight. She had always known Nathaniel had a strength that no one else saw. But now, she was beginning to see Kale's strength, too. He was learning to be the father Nathaniel needed, and in doing so, he was healing his own wounds. Emily stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching them. She had been a part of their journey, but now, she saw her place more clearly. She was no longer just an outsider in the palace. She was an integral part of their lives. Nathaniel looked up and saw her standing there, his smile widening. He stood up and walked over to her, taking her hand in his. "Come join us," he signed, his eyes sparkling with happiness. Emily nodded and followed him back to the steps where Kale sat, a welcoming smile on his face. As Emily sat down beside Nathaniel, she realized how far they had all come. There had been times when she had doubted whether things would ever change, but now, sitting with them, she knew that the past no longer defined them. The future was theirs to shape. "I'm proud of you both," Emily said softly, her voice filled with quiet admiration. Kale turned to her, his expression softer than usual. "We're proud of you, too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had always seen Nathaniel's strength, but now, she saw his father's strength as well. It was a quiet strength, built on patience and understanding, but it was there. They had both come a long way. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the courtyard, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be theirs to navigate together. She was no longer just an Omega Maid in the palace. She was part of something greater, something that was still unfolding. And as she looked at Nathaniel and Kale, she knew that no matter what challenges they would face them together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Emily felt ready for it. With Nathaniel by her side, and Kale learning to embrace his role as a father, Emily knew that nothing could break the bond they had built. Whatever the future held, they would face it as a family.